the Sri Lankan Airlines crisis, the Airbus chapter. And to help us understand the transparency aspects of the whole issue, we've got here the Executive Director of Transparency International Sri Lanka, Mr. Asoka Ubesekera. Very good morning to you, Mr. Ubesekera.
Good morning, Faraz.
What are the sort of key elements that you sort of discovered from a point of view of transparency?
So I think, Faraz, for the public at large, I think there's always been a concern around some of the challenges around managing Sri Lankan Airlines.
Right.
However, what we have come to realize, and I think this has been over a number of years, but there has just a few days, well, a couple of weeks ago now, been a deferred prosecution agreement in the UK,
right,
which has confirmed one key fact, which is that there has been, through corrupt practice, a procurement of airplanes by Sri Lankan Airlines with Airbus.
Right.
And Airbus has admitted to engaging in corrupt practice in supporting that procurement.
Yeah.
That has named two individuals, one person being the former CEO of Sri Lankan Airlines and his spouse as being connected to or having an agreement for $16.84 million, of which $2 million had been paid out to them through other companies. And as you go through the details, and I'll be happy to answer questions on that, it unravels the sort of company structures that were used, the issues of conflict of interest and other things, and which ultimately, looking down the line, led to a very a 17 billion rupee charge to Sri Lankan to cancel the procurement connected to those very same aircraft, which is $116 million.
And that procurement was, as we found out, tainted by the payment of an inducement.
Indeed.
Right.
And so, and as we look, and as we then look at the documentation which is coming out, it starts to unravel itself to show that the procedures and things like that in procurement have also been found wanting.
Right. Well, then, several questions sort of come to mind. The first of all, as you say, the Sri Lankan board in 2012/13 took a decision to purchase these aircraft and take out these leases, and they put that into play. First of all, there were questions raised last week on Face the Nation that they wanted to know what the observations of the Finance Ministry were at the time, given the fact that Sri Lankan Airlines was in a negative equity of 65 billion rupees, and they then proceeded to propose this contract, this thing with Airbus, which is worth about 2.9 billion rupees. It was completely way above what any ordinary business would be able to even contemplate. And so we find that whilst there was a contract, and however that was passed, but we have a contract. That contract was signed before the knowledge of the Airbus admission comes along. So does that new knowledge then mean that the contract they signed earlier than this agreement by Airbus, is that contract tainted?
I mean, I think it certainly would be. I think the one thing that I couldn't speculate on is the details of the contract, because I have not had an opportunity of reading it.
Yeah.
But the idea that the contract could be void is potentially there, but understanding the details of the contract and understanding the actual transaction a little better would be key to that. I think the one thing, though, which is important is that in November 2018, the Auditor General, his concluding remarks in looking into this, it says that it is hereby concluded that the decision which had been taken by the management of the company to add 14 modern aircrafts to the fleet within 8 years without obtaining approval of the Cabinet of Ministers and without making a proper cost-benefit analysis is a decision taken beyond the powers of the management, and therefore the officers are responsible for the failure resulted in that decision. And I think this once again also then shines a light on this nexus between political decision-making and then the decision-making of management and the responsibilities of the directors, because what is being laid out very clearly here by the Auditor General is that if there's no cost-benefit analysis, there's no approval by the Cabinet of Ministers and the like, it is beyond the powers of the management. Right. Now, we have an entire framework now under the National Audit Act on how people who have engaged in corruption or willful negligence and the like, how they are held accountable to the losses caused to the state. But you know, when you speak about this issue around what were the views of the Treasury and other things and the Finance Ministry, that doesn't seem to be, I mean, based on what I'm seeing from the Auditor General.
Exactly. Now, we hear what you say as we read out what the Auditor General says, that there was no approval of the Cabinet, and in the observations at that meeting, the then Treasury Secretary asks that Cabinet paper be withdrawn, because he points out that as Sri Lankan Airlines is organised under the Companies Act as a PSC, there is no need for the Sri Lankan Airlines company to seek the approval of Cabinet to make a purchase or do anything of the sort, because they have a board of directors and it is up to them to make those decisions. So that seems to be at odds with what the Auditor General says thereafter. I mean, this report is after the fact. It's like a forensic of what happened. So what is right? Clearly, the Treasury Secretary's comments that Sri Lankan Airlines is established under the Companies Act is one matter. Does this mean that although over 90% of the shares of Sri Lankan Airlines, and 99%, is owned for and on behalf of the people through the Treasury Secretary, although you have 99%, does it mean that the board is all on their own, that they can do what they want?
I mean, I am sticking to what the Auditor General's views on this matter are, which are that it is clear that there needs to be a cost-benefit analysis, and the fact that the Cabinet of Ministers have not provided their approval. I mean, the idea that there's a 99% stake owned by the state, and then the idea that state oversight then has to be bypassed because it is listed on because it is a company registered under the Companies Act, sounds problematic to me. But I mean, if the Auditor General has made a mistake in this report, then I think it is important that the Auditor General's department also then seeks to clarify this. I've got a feeling, I still feel that what is in the Auditor General's report is most probably correct, and it is probably valuable for the Auditor General's department to come out now to re-emphasize the findings of their report in November 2018, just to sort of further reinstate and build public confidence in their department, in light of the fact that there may be questions raised as to whether they were correct in their determination here.
Why do you think then does the state enter into these sort of areas of ambiguity by registering various institutions under the Companies Act? Is there a case for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the idea that there may be sort of state-owned enterprises that may be registered under the Companies Act, I mean, on the face of it, doesn't seem problematic. The only thing is that if that is used as a means by which accountability to the state is circumvented, that, as you sort of alluded to, that would seem highly problematic.
One of the counter arguments could be that in certain instances, state institutions must be able to act fast and act within the knowledge of within their sort of specialist knowledge, if you like. That doesn't. So therefore, you can deviate or ignore even completely national procurement guidelines.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key point that would connect to that is that when you have an entity that is on paper insolvent, trying to take on a deal of this magnitude, the fact that there is no cost-benefit analysis that has been produced for the key stakeholder that has had to that basically has to underwrite this entity, so 99% state ownership, I think is highly problematic, and I think the sufficient time has to be given to sort of understand the nature of the deal. Now, I think as we sort of dig further into this, I think we realize that even the former state minister on the subject touched on this on TV on Monday evening. The fact that there have been sort of informal meetings at politicians' houses where board decisions have been taken for Sri Lankan Airlines, things like that. I mean, I'm just sort of repeating what he mentioned that day. I mean, if that is the case, I think that is highly problematic. And I think this is the other thing. I mean, that it is essential that the management of Sri Lankan Airlines disconnects itself from the political interests that also sort of may try to sway decisions one way or the other, which don't necessarily have an economic sort of analysis underpinning it. And I think that's going to be key in the decisions taken around Sri Lankan Airlines going forward. But I think one key element when looking ahead is the fact that now we have an issue of bribery and corruption, and that has got a lot of media attention over the last few weeks, and that's a very key element. However, on the other side, we have to now look at how Sri Lanka gets compensation in light of the fact that they've had to pay an enormous cancellation fee for something that Airbus is now admitting was procured through corrupt practices by Airbus officials.
Indeed.
And so, I mean, looking at that, we now have to start looking at how we engage internationally on recovering that $116 million or 17 billion rupees.
And here's your chance to ask questions. Do send them by SMS, please. 0772 300 305. How indeed are we going to recover this money? Because obviously it stems, now it transpires, from a tainted contract. And if it's bad in law at the beginning, then it's bad in law thereafter. You can't have no goodness can follow out of it. And why has this fine been paid just to 3 jurisdictions? It's a record near $4 billion, agreed by Airbus Industries and all their subsidiaries and all that. And it was France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. France got the bulk of it. They got about 2.1 billion euro. B for billion euro. And Britain, the United States got just below $1 billion. And the balance went to the UK. what about these other countries? There's not only Sri Lanka, there's Malaysia, there's Indonesia. Although I read somewhere that in terms of the AirAsia matter, there was $55 million on offer, and that was not paid, apparently. They got caught up, or they got cold feet, or whatever, but the money wasn't paid. But as far as Sri Lankan Airlines is concerned, it was paid. But that's not the only, that's one question. But if we go, that's about the cancellation. But if we go back and we look at the original transaction, the original decision, which, as you pointed out, was made without cabinet approval, the Treasury Secretary at the time says there's no need for cabinet approval. Sri Lankan Airlines as a board, they can go ahead and run the company and make key decisions, in effect, is what he said. Despite all that, we have a situation where we can now discover, and this is not that we're discovering it now, way back then, the director of one of the directors in the sort of post-2015 period, Rajan Brito, suggests to the board that they write to Airbus and ask various questions about this transaction because the numbers don't seem right. And although he even provides a draft, at the following month's meeting, and despite 3 reminders in between, that letter was never sent out, saying that they were in discussions with Airbus on a different issue, and it may compromise those discussions. And somehow, it now transpires that they paid more than the market rates. So it seems that at the time of purchase, something was amiss. Rajan Brito mentions that at a board meeting thereafter, when he's appointed, but nothing has happened in between.
Yeah. So I mean,
what can we do about this overpayment, if you like?
Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that we're talking about a 17 billion rupee payment,
yeah,
the magnitude of that, even if it was significantly less, is still a materially important number.
Indeed.
It's interesting. I mean, you highlight the fact that this is sort of a global issue as well.
Yeah.
And so with a series of other organizations which are found in the other countries connected to this, Transparency International Sri Lanka and its partners had written to the Serious Fraud Office in June 2018, highlighting the fact that it's important that compensation is given to the countries and communities affected by any wrongdoing by Airbus, and that such compensation is based on an analysis of the full harm of that wrongdoing and not just on the amount of any bribe payment made. And the need for in-depth analysis on this. Now, it's interesting. I mean, now you touched on the fact just there that, the 3 jurisdictions have actually finally received the fines.
Yeah.
But the countries which have actually endured and suffered the harm have not been given any compensation. And I think it's essential for Sri Lankan Airlines and the government to now look at the different legal avenues by which we can seek to recover this money. On one side, there are the OECD guidelines on multinational companies. And it says that each country has a designated point of contact that can be engaged for a grievance mechanism system. So for EADS, there is an entity, EADS being the parent company of Airbus, which is listed in France. There's a national contact point in France that we should be seeking to engage straight away and looking through that grievance redress mechanism to how we can seek compensation. On the second route, there is the need to engage with the British authorities to see whether part of the fine which they have received can be given as compensation to Sri Lanka for the losses caused in Sri Lanka. And that will require, I expect, some bilateral engagement, diplomatic engagement to try and facilitate that. There are many different considerations, I'm sure. that the authorities will have when they're considering asset recovery. One point which I would highlight is that over the last few years, there was a proceeds of crime draft bill that was formulated, which really sought to establish an entire framework for how returned assets to Sri Lanka would be managed, to ensure that, you know, we don't get assets which are returned, which are then misused for something else. So how that is ring-fenced and allocated for the needs of people, the needs of Sri Lanka, as opposed to sort of being wasted potentially once again. It's worthwhile for the state to also look at that proceeds of crime bill and see whether the mechanisms there need to be in place for when this happens next time round as well. But I think those two initial routes, one engaging the UK authorities about getting a part of the fine, the other one about engaging the French authorities on the redress mechanism from Airbus directly, that those will be two essential immediate points.
Now then, it says here, somebody's asking here, I think rather valid question. If the Treasury was right at the beginning, saying that the Sri Lankan Airlines did not need cabinet approval, then two questions arise, and I'm pointing it out. One, in that case, it was okay for Kabir Hashim to be ignored. He's the line minister. He has a long list of complaints in his cabinet memo at the time, and so there's it's therefore Sri Lankan Airlines doesn't need cabinet approval, so there's no need for a line minister, or the line minister is being ignored. Secondly, why then, if cabinet approval was not needed at the beginning, why did the Treasury have to pay for help Sri Lankan Airlines to pay this money? Second question. And then the third question that follows is, of course, that in that case, how come the board of Sri Lankan Airlines, in explaining why they didn't keep the line minister informed, their response was that they went ahead even without telling the CCEM, which is a specialist unit of the cabinet, within the cabinet. So they didn't even tell the CCEM. They went ahead and agreed to pay this money because they say that they kept the finance minister and the prime minister informed, or they had the assent from those two. But my question to you, Ashoka, is in this whole transparency matter and the fact that the Cabinet of Ministers have a collective responsibility, they also have a collective right to be informed, so that everybody, collective responsibility means you need to be kept informed of everything. Otherwise, how can you be collectively responsible? So here we see a case where the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance have acted, if you like, independently of the rules, independently of the rest of the cabinet.
Yes, I mean, I think so. Your question, Faraz,
is focusing on how come you have two ministers. One happens to be the Prime Minister, and the other happens to be the Minister of Finance, who have apparently dealt with the board of Sri Lankan Airlines and said, yeah, mate, go ahead. Right? But that is to the detriment of informing the rest of the cabinet. And how can collective responsibility flow when even the line minister doesn't know about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is something I think that was once again touched on by the State Minister on the matter on Monday, the fact that if there is there was this language around sovereign guarantee, and so the fact that if the state is underwriting the potential losses that emanate from these deals, the fact that the state is not kept informed, and then in that light, the executive arm, the apex executive arm being the cabinet, the fact that they're not being kept informed is, I think, highly problematic. But I think...
But we see this problem happening all the time, Asuka. If you remember the evidence given by Archana Mahendran before the Diu Gunasekara headed COPE committee, he said, I only did what the Prime Minister asked me to do. Or words to that effect. I did what the Prime Minister told me to do.
Yeah.
Right, but
so
the Prime Minister says, well, you know, I said it. I insisted, in fact, but I didn't expect him to break the law.
Yeah, I think there's the one issue regarding the procurement itself, which is the pre-2015 government, which has now become very clear was underscored by corruption. When it comes to the cancellation, it's interesting. I mean, if there is any sort of allegation of any corrupt practice connected to the cancellation, that hasn't yet come to light. And I mean, if there is any, that is something that we would have particular interest in looking at and examining closer. The fact that communication channels have not been properly followed, I mean, that's a concern. But I mean, I think the Auditor General's report is very clear in saying that a decision taken beyond the powers of management. So the fact that the Auditor General, and I mean, this is a very, very detailed review that the Auditor General has gone into. I only just have the conclusions right here. When you go through that entire report, I mean, the fact that they're concluding that this is an issue where the management has exceeded their powers and not touching on the issues around how cabinet themselves have dealt with the cancellation costs. I think it's important for the Auditor General to clarify his position there, just so that, because I may hazard an opinion on this around how Cabinet may have dealt with the cancellation, but I think it's important to ensure that the Auditor General is also very clear on his position on the cancellation on charges as well. Because otherwise, a lot of the responsibility as far as the Auditor General's report goes really places it and says, and therefore the officers are responsible for the failure resulting in this decision.
I've got a message here from one of our viewers, and I think it makes sense. And it's quite relevant, so I'm going to read it. You and your guests talk, and go back, be happy about your own voices, and the corrupt cares two hoots for you or your guys. Talk without action is a waste of airtime. What do you say? Does it not help that we talk and discuss these matters?
I mean, now, for instance, this being on a show like this today sort of also gives, let's say, me an opportunity, and Transparency International Sri Lanka an opportunity of highlighting the fact that, you know, we have sent a letter to the Serious Fraud Office in June 2018 on this very matter. The fact that there has been a world record fine for corruption connected to this by the same authorities that we have been engaging with for over the last 2 years, I think would maybe illustrate the fact that this is not only talk. 2 years ago we were working on this and just and actually getting this in action, and now we are seeing the fruits of that sort of labor now. I think the thing that we are now trying to focus on is how we ensure that the compensation actually then is provided to Sri Lanka to cover the harm that has been caused domestically here. And that's why Sri Lankan Airlines and the government need to ensure that that pushes forward. It is completely in the public interest, and I don't think that you will find anyone who will say that they don't want to engage and try to recover compensation for the harm that has been caused. So I think that's going to be key. One further point which I'll make is that we also flagged this up not only to the Serious Fraud Office, but we also flagged this up to the Presidential Commission to inquire into allegations of large-scale frauds and malpractices in Sri Lankan Airlines. Not Pressifact, the Sri Lankan Airlines Commission. And so this same information has also been brought before the Domestic Commission. I think one of the challenges is that this also shines a light on to whether these domestic commissions of inquiry, the effectiveness of them as well, purely because we finally see only after the deferred prosecution agreement on a Friday is announced in the UK that on the Monday or the Tuesday, that the two individuals named there are taken into remand in Sri Lanka, despite the fact that we've had a big commission of inquiry and everything else domestically. So where the accountability really pulls from, we should really be trying to ensure that the accountability pulls from the domestic mechanism, not only just sort of reflecting the decisions that are taken in a UK court and then action being taken in Sri Lanka.
Yeah.
Now, I think we are also hearing, and there was an article in the morning paper this Sunday, which really sort of unpacked the work that had also been done by the CID as well into actually getting to the bottom of this. And I think we should credit the fact that there has been a lot of work which has been done by domestic investigators here, but the fact that we still require almost the cover that is provided by an international decision to then domestically take action is, I think, problematic, and that has to really be looked at very carefully. The fact that we only act domestically, not when we find something out domestically, but when something internationally.
It seems to be giving sort of impetus to the domestic
Exactly.
operation.
You know, I mean, I've got a feeling a lot of this information sat on the books of local entities and was not actioned on until the UK courts made a decision.
But
and
we
that,
know
I think,
that
is highly problematic.
We do know that the FCID shared information with the SFO, the Serious Fraud Office, under this Mutual Legal Assistance Program and treaties. And so that is very good.
Yeah.
But like you say, it appears that our domestic prosecution mechanism, the AG's department, for some reason or other, didn't want to go ahead and prosecute themselves. They waited for this thing to happen elsewhere, and as in this case, it happened in Britain. What are the chances for asset recovery then?
I mean, I think...
because the reason I'm asking this question, the government that authorized this purchase, or didn't authorize this purchase, under whose watch this purchase was made, a financial non-starter for any business other than Sri Lankan Airlines, is now, with a slight adjustment, is now in power again. So how committed would they be to uncovering further details of this fraud, even going after Airbus?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that there has been a significant loss from the cancellation fees, this present government must be committed to pursuing and getting compensation for that loss. I think the authorities that they're going to have to deal with will inevitably have in the back of their minds the fact that this procurement took place under the watch of many of the same people that are now in power. It is an inevitable consideration that is going to go through the minds...
Which is probably why one of our viewers has sent this message very quickly. The $2 million bribe is probably just the tip of the iceberg. Do you think claiming compensation is going to happen? Because as soon as you do that, the various other bribes paid to the others will have to come out. Do you think this government has the will?
Well, I mean, I think that's why it's going to be essential that on one side organizations like ours, but more importantly the media, also continue to drive the accountability of the government on this issue. We're talking about a 17 billion rupee pot which we should be asking for, at the very least 17 billion. There will be other losses which go beyond just the cancellation fee as well. And if our government does not want to ask and engage in the discussion of recovering that amount of money, there have to be serious questions asked about our government and Sri Lankan Airlines as well.
And serious questions about the actions of the board members in both, in the purchasing of it and in the cancellation of it.
Absolutely, but I think it is key that Sri Lankan Airlines and the government treat this as enormously important. I mean, I think someone like yourself as well, Faraz, in understanding the numbers, underscoring things like the bond scam and things like that, when we hear 17 billion rupees being paid out, we realize, I mean, how that is an enormous sum, even when compared to some of the amounts that we were seeing connected in the bond scam.
Indeed, 17 billion is the amount that could be recovered to the EPF on the bond scam, but carry on.
Yeah, so I mean, looking at those, the fact that we're talking about quantums in that same realm, and the fact that we don't want to even ask those questions, we should be alarming. Now, I'm not saying that no one's willing to ask those questions. I know that this is a relatively recent thing, given everything that's happened over the last few weeks, but I think it is essential that Sri Lankan Airlines, the board of Sri Lankan Airlines, and the government as well, come out and publicly state that they will vigorously pursue the return of the money that has been paid out to cancel a contract that has been procured through corruption. And if they don't do that, that would be highly troubling and concerning. And I think they should do that before the election as well, just to underscore their commitment to fighting corruption and cleaning up the system, which the president has made very, very clear in his manifesto as well.
Thank you, Kobe Sekre. And of course, this whole matter underscores the commitment of News First towards encouraging transparency, accountability, and encouraging the government to be as transparent as possible, as transparent as the law will allow us to, notwithstanding national security. But thank you very much. And that's the way it was on Newsline Live. Take care, have a wonderful day ahead of you, and of course, God bless.
News First, Newsline.